Hello, friends. I'm Mrs. Donnelly, and in the last chapter of The World According to Humphrey, we learned about Humphrey's home visit to Miranda's house and all of the problems he was having with her big dog Clem and how he solved those problems. I can't wait to find out what happens in Chapter 10, Garth versus AJ. If you have dogs or cats, you have to be very careful not to let them get near Humphrey, Miranda warned the rest of the class when we returned to room 26. You can say that again, I squeaked, but she didn't. I still considered Golden Miranda to be a special friend, and I had a very clean cage to show for my weekend, as well as a new respect for rubber bands. But I also decided that even though Miranda is practically a perfect person, I was not in a hurry to stay with her again. AJ raised his hand and Mrs. Brisbane called on him. "May I have Humphrey this weekend? We don't have a dog or a cat," he bellowed. "Lower your voice, AJ. I'll let you know on Thursday. There may be other students who want Humphrey as well." At least half the hands in the classroom went up as kids started shouting, "Me, me!" I was quite flattered, but for some reason the whole subject seemed to make Garth mad. Within minutes he shot a rubber band at AJ. "Ouch!" AJ complained loudly. When he told the teacher what happened, Garth denied it. "Humphrey did it," he said. Gal giggled. Mrs. Brisbane did not. "I don't believe a hamster can shoot a rubber band," she said sternly. A lot she knows. The next day, Garth stuck his foot out and tripped Art as he went to sharpen his pencil. "I didn't do it. He's just clumsy," Garth protested when Mrs. Brisbane angrily scolded him again. That same day, Garth pushed Gal at morning recess. He spent afternoon recess inside. "Garth Tugwell, you're halfway to Principal Morales' office right now." Mrs. Brisbane sounded really angry. Garth just shrugged his shoulders. On Wednesday, Garth sneaked back into the room while Mrs. Brisbane went to the office during recess, and he headed straight for my cage. The two of us were all alone in the room. "Hello, Rat. Why don't you just run away? Then nobody will take you home on the weekend," he said. He opened my cage door and grabbed me. "You'd like your freedom, wouldn't you, Rat?" He set me on the floor. My heart was pounding. Thump, thump, thump. "Go on, Rat, skedaddle." He gave me a little push with his hand. I scampered under the table. I wanted to say something, but for the first time ever, I was scared squeakless. "Have fun," he said. And in an instant, he was gone. I was pretty confused. For one thing, I didn't want to run away. I was perfectly happy staying in room 26 and having adventures on the weekend. Where would I go? What would I do? There was no time to waste. I scampered over to the cord that hung down from the blinds and grabbed onto it. Then I started the old swinging routine, back and forth, swinging a little higher each time until I reached the tabletop. Back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, leap! There wasn't time to think about my queasy stomach as I raced into my cage, slamming the door shut behind me. Just then, Mrs. Brisbane returned. I darted into my sleeping house so she wouldn't see how hard I was breathing. I saw her look at the window, puzzled. She walked over to it and stared at the blind cord, which was still swinging. She reached out and stopped it with her hand. Then she shook her head and walked away. When recess was over and my classmates filed back into the class, Garth looked over at my cage, half smiling. But that smile quickly disappeared when he saw that the door was closed. He leaped out of his seat and looked into my cage. "Howdy," I squeaked to him. "Garth, please get back in your seat," Mrs. Brisbane told him. "But Humphrey." "Well, what is it?" Mrs. Brisbane was getting irritated. "He's in his cage," he said. A few of my classmates giggled, but not Mrs. Brisbane. "In case you haven't noticed, he's always in his cage, Garth," she said. "Now get back to your seat." Garth did what she said, but for the rest of the day I noticed him staring over at me. On Thursday, Mrs. Brisbane announced that I would be spending the weekend at AJ's house. "Yes!" shouted AJ, delighted in the news. A few seconds later, a whole series of rubber bands hit AJ on his neck, shoulder, and head. "Cool it, Garth!" yelled AJ, jumping out of his chair. "Man, I'm tired of these rubber bands." Garth acted innocent. "I don't know where they came from. They could have come from anywhere." "Garth did it," Heidi said. "I saw him." Mrs. Brisbane didn't remind Heidi to raise her hand, but she did tell Garth to stay in during recess. "Not fair," Garth muttered under his breath. When the bell rang for recess, Garth stayed in his seat. Mrs. Brisbane closed the door when all the other students had left and walked to his desk. Normally I would have been napping at this time, but I was wide awake and wondering what that boy had to say. "Garth, you've been acting strange lately. You never got in trouble at all until 2 weeks ago. Now you're shooting rubber bands at people and disturbing the entire class. Can you tell me why?" I wonder what this is all about. Tune in tomorrow to find out more about Garth from the Mystery Reader.